never thought I'd be the one to have the last laugh, but here I am. My husband used to mock me in front of his friends, calling me clingy and needy whenever I asked about his late nights out. Little did he know, while he was busy entertaining his friends with stories about his desperate wife, I was quietly building an empire that would eventually leave him speechless. It all started 3 years ago when I overheard him on the phone with his best friend, laughing about how I had no idea what was really happening when he claimed to be working late. That moment changed everything for me. Not because I was heartbroken, though I certainly was, but because it awakened something in me that had been dormant for far too long. My sense of self-worth and determination. I realized I'd been settling for crumbs of attention and respect in my own marriage, making excuses for a man who saw me as nothing more than a punchline for his friends' entertainment. That night, I didn't confront him or cause a scene as he might have expected. Instead, I made a promise to myself that I would reclaim my power in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The next morning, I went about my routine as usual, making his favorite breakfast, kissing him goodbye at the door, playing the role of the devoted wife he took for granted. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. I started paying more attention to our finances, noticing how careless he was with money, especially the inheritance I'd received from my grandmother years earlier. He never questioned when I suggested opening a separate account for household expenses, which became my first step toward financial independence. What fascinated me was how blind he was to the changes in me. He was so convinced of my dependence on him that he couldn't see I was gradually pulling away, emotionally and financially. Every time he came home bragging about the expensive rounds of drinks he bought for his friends, or the fancy dinner he treated them to, I smiled and nodded while mentally calculating how I could invest the money I was quietly setting aside. I started researching investment opportunities, connecting with financial advisors who took me seriously. Unlike my husband who dismissed my interest in finances as cute, but ultimately pointless. One advisor in particular, Sarah, became not just my financial guide, but a friend who restored my belief in myself. "You have an excellent instinct for investment opportunities," she told me after I'd successfully doubled my initial savings through some careful stock picks and property investments. Those words meant everything to me after years of being made to feel incapable and insecure. With Sarah's guidance, I focused on real estate in an up-and-coming neighborhood that my husband and his friends regularly mocked as never going to improve. They would drive through the area on their way to their favorite bar, pointing and laughing at the desperate renovation projects. Meanwhile, I was quietly purchasing property there through an LLC that Sarah helped me establish, keeping my name off any paperwork that might alert my husband. The irony was delicious. While he was spending money impressing his friends, I was investing in properties that would later skyrocket in value, due to a major tech company announcing a new headquarters nearby. That neighborhood they laughed at? It suddenly became the hottest real estate market in the city. My first property tripled in value within 18 months, and I used that equity to purchase 2 more buildings. Throughout this time, my husband remained oblivious, still treating me like I was the same insecure woman who needed his approval for every decision. "Don't worry your pretty head about money," he'd say whenever I asked innocent questions about our joint finances. "That's why you have me." If only he knew that I was building a portfolio that would soon surpass our combined marital assets, he might have paid more attention to the wife he so casually dismissed. The dynamic at home began to shift subtly as my confidence grew along with my secret success. I stopped flinching when he criticized me, stopped apologizing for taking up space in our relationship. He noticed the change but attributed it to what he called my women's empowerment phase, that he assumed would eventually pass. "Been watching those feminist TED Talks again?" He joked to his friends when I expressed an opinion at dinner parties, prompting their condescending chuckles. What none of them realized was that while they were laughing, I was closing deals on my phone under the table, growing my separate financial life with each passing day. Those dinner parties became almost enjoyable once I stopped seeking his approval. I'd smile mysteriously when they made their jokes, knowing that I held secrets that would eventually turn the tables completely. There's a certain power in being underestimated, in having people believe you're less capable than you actually are. Everything changed when my husband's company unexpectedly downsized, and he lost the job that had been the foundation of his ego and our lifestyle. Suddenly, The man who had always positioned himself as the provider, the protector, the financially savvy one in our relationship, was scrambling. His friends, those same ones who had laughed at his jokes about me, were suddenly too busy to return his calls or meet him for those expensive nights out. I watched him spiral over the following weeks, his confidence crumbling as rejection letters piled up, and his savings dwindled on maintaining appearances. "I don't understand," he confessed one night after too many drinks, a vulnerability in his voice I'd never heard before. "I did everything right. I was the successful one." The temptation to reveal my secret life was strong in that moment, but something told me to wait. His identity was so wrapped up in being the breadwinner, in being admired by his friends, that I knew the revelation of my success needed to come at the right time. When he suggested we sell our house to stay afloat until things turn around, I finally saw my opportunity. "Actually," I said calmly over dinner one evening, "I have another solution." The look of confusion on his face as I explained my financial situation, the investments, the properties, the substantial portfolio I'd built while he was busy mocking me to his friends, was something I'll never forget. At first, he thought I was joking, then he accused me of lying, and finally, as I showed him the documentation Sarah had helped me prepare, his expression shifted to one of shock and disbelief. "All this time," he whispered, his voice a mixture of awe and something else, fear perhaps at the realization that he didn't know me at all. "All this time," I confirmed, "while you were telling your friends how clingy and financially inept I was building something that would ultimately save us both." The power dynamic between us shifted permanently in that moment. He saw me, really saw me, perhaps for the first time since we'd been married. Our marriage didn't survive, but not for the reasons you might think. Once my husband realized I was no longer the dependent woman he could easily dismiss, once he understood that I had options and agency he never suspected, something fundamental broke between us. He couldn't reconcile the strong, capable woman I'd become with the submissive wife he thought he'd married. His pride couldn't handle the reversal of our roles, especially when I offered to help him financially while he got back on his feet. "I don't need your charity," he hissed during one of our final arguments, the word, "you're" spoken with such venom that it clarified everything about how he viewed our partnership. It had never been about us or ours. Even when things were good, the power and success had always been his in his mind. When I suggested selling our marital home and moving somewhere more affordable given his situation, he reacted as if I'd suggested the most humiliating option imaginable. That was when I decided to make my boldest move yet. I put in an offer on the very property where he and his friends used to hold their weekend gatherings. It was an impressive house on the lake, owned by a friend of a friend, where they would host their guys-only parties that would leave my husband hungover and distant for days afterward. The property had come on the market unexpectedly when the owner faced financial troubles. Troubles not unlike what my husband was experiencing now. When my offer was accepted, I kept the information to myself, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal this final piece of my transformation. That moment came during our divorce proceedings, when his lawyer smugly suggested I would be left with little after the separation since my husband had been the primary earner throughout our marriage. The look on both their faces when my lawyer calmly presented documentation of my assets was priceless, especially when she mentioned my recent purchase of the lake house. "You bought Frank's place?" my husband asked incredulously after the meeting, referring to his friend who had sold the property. "Why would you do that?" I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest without being deliberately cruel. "Because every time you went there, you came back a little less mine," I finally said. "Now when I go there, I'm completely my own." He stood silent for a long moment, and I could see him processing everything, not just the financial implications, but the complete reversal of who we had become to each other. "I never thought you had it in you," he admitted, a mix of admiration and regret in his voice. "That was the problem," I replied quietly. "You never really thought about what I had in me at all." As we finalized our divorce, I moved into the lake house and began renovations, transforming the space that had once been filled with his friends' laughter at my expense into a sanctuary that represented my journey from dismissed wife to self-made woman. The final twist came 6 months after our divorce was finalized, when the real estate market took another unexpected turn. A major development was announced near several of my properties, causing their values to skyrocket overnight. Meanwhile, my ex-husband had been forced to take a position well below his previous status and salary just to make ends meet. When news of my sudden wealth increase made its way through our former social circle, his friends, the same ones who had laughed at his jokes about his clingy, financially inept wife, began reaching out to me. First came casual congratulatory messages, then invitations to coffee to catch up, and finally transparent attempts to explore business opportunities with me. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I once thought I would. Instead, I felt a calm certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, living a life that was authentically mine rather than one defined by someone else's perception of me. I hosted my first lake house party exactly 1 year after the day I'd overheard my husband mocking me on the phone. The guest list didn't include any of his old friends, but rather the people who had supported my journey: Sarah, my financial advisor; Maria, the real estate agent who had taken me seriously from day one; and several women I'd met through a business network who had become dear friends and collaborators. Standing on the deck overlooking the water, champagne in hand, I toasted to new beginnings and unexpected journeys, to understanding that the people who underestimate you do you a favor, I said, because they have no idea what you're capable of when you have nothing to prove to them anymore. Later that evening, as my guests departed and I stood alone watching the sunset reflect off the lake, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my ex-husband, a simple message that read, "I heard about your party at the lake house. I hope you're happy." For a moment, I considered not responding, but then I typed back, "I am. Not because of the house, but because I finally found my worth." The responses from my ex-husband's friends when they discovered who now owned their favorite party spot ranged from disbelief to awkward attempts at rekindling friendship. One particularly memorable encounter happened at a charity gala where James, my husband's former best friend, and the one who had laughed the loudest at his jokes about me, approached my table. "You look amazing," he said, his eyes taking in my confidence as much as my appearance. "Marriage clearly wasn't agreeing with you." The old me might have smiled politely and accepted the backhanded compliment, but the woman I'd become had no interest in his approval. "Actually, James," I replied, maintaining steady eye contact, "it wasn't the marriage that was the problem. It was being married to someone who thought diminishing me made him appear larger." His uncomfortable laugh and quick retreat told me everything I needed to know about how my transformation had disrupted their comfortable narrative about who I was supposed to be. What surprised me most about my new life wasn't the financial success, or even the newfound respect from people who once dismissed me. It was how differently I moved through the world once I stopped making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego. I started mentoring other women in financial literacy, particularly those going through divorces who found themselves navigating financial independence for the first time. "Your worth isn't determined by what someone else thinks you can handle," I would tell them, sharing my story not as a revenge tale, but as proof that we are all capable of more than we've been conditioned to believe. One woman, after successfully negotiating her divorce settlement using strategies I'd shared, hugged me with tears in her eyes. "I never thought I could do this on my own," she admitted. "Neither did I responded truthfully, until I realized no one was coming to save me but myself. These connections, these moments of shared growth and empowerment, brought me a fulfillment that no amount of revenge or validation ever could. The lake house evolved from a symbol of my transformation to the headquarters of my growing investment company, where I specialized in helping women achieve financial independence. My ex-husband eventually relocated to another state for a job opportunity, and our direct contact dwindled to occasional emails regarding final legal matters. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had started dating again, but struggled to maintain relationships, particularly with women who had their own financial stability and independence. Part of me felt compassion for him. It couldn't be easy to reconstruct your identity after having it so thoroughly dismantled, but I no longer felt responsible for his growth or happiness. That space in my heart had been reclaimed for my own dreams and relationships with people who valued me completely. Sometimes when I'm working late at the lake house, watching the moon reflect off the water, I remember how it felt to be that woman who believed her value was tied to someone else's assessment of her worth. The memory feels distant now, like watching a movie about someone else's life. On the 3-year anniversary of my divorce, I received an unexpected email from my ex-husband. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he wrote, "about how things ended between us and the man I was during our marriage. I didn't see you, not really, and I'm sorry for that." The message continued with reflections on his therapy journey and how he was working to change his patterns in relationships. Reading his words, I felt a complex mix of emotions: validation, certainly, but also a genuine hope that his growth was real. I wrote back a simple response: "Thank you for this. Growth looks good on both of us." His reply came quickly: "The lake house. Is it everything you hoped it would be?" I smiled as I typed my answer, thinking about all the transformations those walls had witnessed. "It's more," I wrote. "It's everything I never knew I could hope for." We haven't corresponded since, but I no longer need closure or validation from the person who once made me question my value. The lake house stands as testament enough, not to a story of revenge, but to the power of believing in yourself when no one else does. Life has a way of coming full circle in the most unexpected ways. Last month, I was featured in a business magazine highlighting women entrepreneurs who had built successful companies from unlikely beginnings. When the journalist asked what advice I would give to women feeling undervalued in their relationships or careers, I thought carefully before answering. "Pay attention to how you feel when you're with certain people," I finally said. "If you consistently feel smaller, less capable, or as if you need to apologize for taking up space, that's not about your worth. It's about their need to keep you contained so they can feel secure." The article went viral, and my inbox flooded with messages from women sharing their own stories of transformation. One message in particular stood out, from the sister of one of my ex-husband's friends who wrote, "You probably don't remember me, but I was at several gatherings where my brother and your ex made jokes at your expense. I never spoke up, and I've regretted that silence. Your story has given me permission to finally use my voice." The lake house has become much more than a property in my portfolio. It's a physical reminder of how far I've come and the power of silently building while others underestimate you. Sometimes new clients are surprised when they learn its history. That this serene, light-filled space where women now gather to learn about financial empowerment was once the site of gatherings where a wife was routinely mocked in her absence. "Doesn't it feel strange," they often ask, "to work in a place with those memories?" But that's precisely why this location is so perfect for what I do now. Every woman who walks through these doors with uncertainty in her eyes and leaves with a plan and renewed confidence is reclaiming not just her own power, but transforming the energy of this space. The lake house isn't a trophy of revenge. It's proof that our lowest moments don't define us. They prepare us for a future we couldn't have imagined when we were just trying to survive. Last week, a client who had doubled her investment under my guidance paused before leaving. "You know what the best revenge is?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Living well in spaces where you were once made to feel that you didn't belong." My journey from dismissed wife to successful entrepreneur hasn't been without its challenges. There were nights I questioned everything, moments when the easier path seemed to be returning to the comfort of who I used to be rather than pushing forward into the unknown of who I could become. Those were the times when having the right support system proved invaluable. Women who held space for my doubts without letting me settle back into limitation. Sarah, my first financial advisor, now sits on the board of my company. "Remember that day you first walked into my office?" she reminisced recently over lunch. "You were so tentative, almost apologetic for wanting to learn about investing." We both laughed at the memory, at how unrecognizable that woman seems now. "I knew you had it in you though," she continued. "There was this spark when you talked about building something of your own, like you were finally giving yourself permission to want more." She was right. That first step toward financial independence had been about so much more than money. It had been about reclaiming my right to determine my own value in a world that had taught me to outsource that assessment to others. As my company grew, so did the opportunities to expand the lake house's purpose. What began as my personal office evolved into a retreat center, where we now host weekend workshops for women at financial crossroads: divorce, career changes, retirement planning, entrepreneurship. The house that once echoed with belittling jokes about a wife's neediness now resonates with the powerful sound of women supporting each other's ambitions. Last month, during our Financial Foundations retreat, a participant shared how her husband had called her business idea cute before patting her on the head, literally, and changing the subject. The room fell silent for a moment before another woman said gently, "My ex-husband used to do the same thing. 5 years later, my cute little business pays for my children's college education." Around the circle, heads nodded in recognition, not just of the dismissal but of the determination that follows when you decide someone else's limitation won't become your reality. These moments of connection remind me why this work matters, not just the financial education, but creating spaces where women can recognize patterns that keep them small and find the courage to break free. The most meaningful transformation of the lake house occurred when I converted the basement, once the man cave, where my ex and his friends would retreat during parties, into a nonprofit community center offering free financial literacy classes to women from underserved communities. Money isn't just about survival, I tell these groups during our first session together. It's about choice, freedom, and the ability to shape your own life. For many of these women, no one has ever presented financial knowledge as something they deserve to have, as power they are entirely capable of wielding. Watching their confidence grow over the 8-week program brings me a fulfillment that no amount of personal success ever could. Last Tuesday, a young single mother who had completed the program 6 months earlier stopped by to share her news. She had saved enough for a down payment on her first home. "My daughter will grow up knowing we own the roof over our heads," she said, her eyes bright with pride. "She'll grow up seeing what's possible when you believe in yourself." In moments like these, I realize how far beyond revenge my journey has taken me. Into purpose, into legacy, into showing others what's possible when you refuse to stay in the box someone else built for you.